Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the broadcast. My name is Justice Knight, and I can't thank you enough for being here. Today's going to be a tough broadcast for a lot of you to hear. As it states over my shoulder right now on Rethink X, we are on the cusp of the fastest, deepest, most consequential disruption of agriculture in history. In many ways, that statement can be proven to be very accurate. The findings that I uncovered are beyond anything I ever expected to see, and it's why I needed to share them with you. I understand food and food chain. It's been a portion of my life for almost my entire life. So when this discovery came out, when this report came out, I had to bring it to you, but I need you to hang in there because there's going to be some detailed information. But it's critical that we understand this for the future of potentially our civilization. Now, before I get there, I'm going to ask you once again, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. Make sure the bell is checked and notifications are turned on. If you don't want to rely on YouTube to notify you of my upcoming broadcasts, please go to the link just above my head. Subscribe at justiceaknight.com by simply putting in your email, and I'll only send you an email when I put up a new broadcast. But now back to this entire article. Now, what is this all about? It has to do with what you see on your screen, the Impossible Burger. Try the Impossible Burger, meat from plants. Whoa, this a fat burger advertisement. And remembering way back when this published on Fox News, world's first test tube burger costs almost $400,000, lacks flavor. That's right, lab-created meat. But this technology has moved far beyond this at this point in time. You may have seen this in your retail store, Beyond Meat, the Beyond Burger plant-based burger patties. 20 grams of protein per serving, and that is one of the selling points they're using. This is a more efficient source of protein, one that they can control. The implications by which I can't even begin to tell you could be if this was a pure technology. We haven't uncovered enough of it to completely understand. We're going to show you how they're trying to sell it to the American public and the warnings they're giving about how they're going to be attempted to be shot down in their argument. But let's understand a little bit more about this process in a very quick little snip. This published on Wired.
Just take a small amount of tissue from an animal, then filter it and isolate cells that they can grow. That means providing warmth and oxygen, as well as feeding them salts, sugars, and proteins, essentially tricking the cells into thinking that they're still inside their owner. The cells naturally replicate as they would inside the body, growing into something that looks more and more like food.
Something that looks more and more like food, but if you actually studied the process, it's a little creepy at this point in time. You're not going to get a center-cut prime steak at this point. No, you're going to get something that resembles ground meat, and that's about it. But the implications are staggering, even beyond just the creation of this little market share. Now, you see here, climate change threatens future of farming in Europe. Published on preventionweb.net. Well, what does this have to do with the argument justice? I'm going to show you how they're wrapping this new lab-created meat into helping our climate. Oh, it's all part of the same agenda. And when you see the date they tag to it, it's really going to be eye-opening. New report, major disruption in food and agriculture in the next decade, published on venturebeat.com, which inspired this entire article. We'll just go into a little bit of what they have to say. The report details the way different parts of the cow, meat, milk, collagen, and leather in the markets they serve will be disrupted separately and concurrently by different technologies and business model innovations that overlap, reinforce, and accelerate on one another. This is going to pick up pace if everything they predict here comes true beyond anything you and I can imagine, disrupting markets around the globe. And here in America, our farmers are in big, big trouble. The author refers to this disruption as death by 1,000 cuts. Product after product that comes from the cow will be replaced by cheaper, higher quality, what they're calling modern foods, a key term to keep in mind, triggering a death spiral of increasing prices, decreasing demand, and reversing economies of scale for the industrial livestock industry. Oh, beyond, again, what I ever expected to see. Now, this is Rethink X, back to the original article. By 2030, the number of cows in the U.S. will have fallen by 50%, and the cattle farming industry will be all but bankrupt. All other livestock industries will suffer a similar fate, while the knock-on effect for crop farmers and businesses throughout the value chain will be severe. It's almost threats in some ways. Rethinking food and agriculture shows how the modern food disruption of our current food chain and the way we supply it, the way we grow it, the cattle. Then it's going to go beyond that. It's going to go to chicken. It's going to go to seafood. It's going everywhere that nobody ever expected. And what do they call this model of production? Food as software. That is a horrible description for our food supply. I can't go on to explain enough because now our food will be controlled by a lab. If that doesn't have you concerned, as it does me, we're going to have to dig a lot deeper. So by the time we're done here, you'll have a much better, well-rounded understanding of what's happening. By 2030, demand for cow products will have fallen by 70%. Before we reach this point, the U.S. cattle industry will be all but bankrupt. Why did they have to put 2030? Does that happen to coincide with another agenda we're all very familiar with? Controlling of our food. And just because they're saying they're going to crash the prices to knock out competition, which is traditional in any business model, doesn't mean they're not going to re-escalate the prices after they have full control of our food supply inside a laboratory. And that's the actual crux of this argument. By 2035, demand for cow products will have shrunk by 80 to 90%. And as I stated just earlier, other livestock markets such as chicken, pig, and fish will follow a similar trajectory. What a trajectory. They give you their key findings and economic implications, which are going to be very eye-opening and probably uncover a little bit more of this overall agenda. But don't worry, in their report published here, Rethinking Food and Agriculture 2020 to 2030, they put up every warning that they possibly can, even about us, alternate news media that will potentially fight back against this movement. Well, until a food supply is proven, I am very hesitant to ever allow it to the American public, or any public for that matter, because this is an absolute life-changing event as they portray it. Executive summary, again, we are on the cusp of the deepest, fastest, most consequential disruption. They keep saying disruption over and over again in the food and agriculture production since the first domestication of plant and animals 10,000 years ago. This is what they're calling the second domestication of microbes, microbiology, lab-created meat, domestication in a lab. Staggering terminology you're using in this article. Again, the cost of proteins will be 5 times cheaper by 2030 and 10 times cheaper by 2035. More so than existing animal proteins by ultimately approaching the cost of sugar. Your protein for the cost of sugar created in our lab for your enjoyment. They go again to talk about how they're going to bankrupt the entire industry, and then at the very bottom say this is the result of rapid advancements in precision biology. They have allowed us to make huge strides in precision fermentation, the process through which they're creating these proteins, a process that allows us to program microorganisms to produce almost any complex organic molecule. That's a huge statement. We can create any organic molecule in the lab. You couple this with CRISPR technology, and we are basically treading all over God and everything that he created and saying, don't worry, we can do a better job in the lab, make it more efficient, safer, cheaper, and ultimately, at the end, remember, the end game is to control our food supply. Modern foods have already started disrupting the ground meat market, but once cost parity is reached, the two equal pricing, we believe in 2021 to 2023, adoption will tip and accelerate exponentially. The disruption will play out in a number of ways and does not rely solely on a direct one-for-one substitution of the end product. In some markets, only a small percentage of the ingredients need to be replaced for an entire product to be disrupted. Only a small portion of the cow needs to be taken away for that cow price to begin to accelerate. If we don't need ground beef from the cow, the major commodity that comes out of cattle now disappears, making every other byproduct of the cattle cost more, disrupting the supply. That's what they're talking about. I'm going to try to put this in a little simpler terms. And they use the example of milk, that all they have to do is replace 3.3% of the milk supply, which now they say is right on the balancing edge of a knife, ready to topple one way or another, and they can easily bankrupt it by disrupting or creating a substitute for milk with a higher protein content, is the long and short of that argument, a very bad one to say the least. Their summary of key findings: by 2030, demand for cow products will have fallen again by 70%, by 2035 by 80 to 90%. Production volumes of U.S. beef and dairy industries and their supplies will decline by more than 50% in 2030, by 90% in 2035. Staggering numbers. Crop farming volumes such as soy, corn, and alfalfa will fall by more than 50%. This is a complete takeover of agriculture, a complete takeover by basically pharma, because remember, if this is a lab-created item, it is controlled by the FDA. If it is cattle, it's controlled by the USDA. The Food and Drug Administration would potentially, and this hasn't been decided ultimately yet, control lab-created meats or this fermentation process they're discussing. That should terrify you. Key impacts of the food and agricultural disruption. Oh, here we go. Now we're starting to get into it a little bit more. They get into prices, and then they get into U.S. greenhouse gas emissions from cattle will drop by 60% by 2030 again, that's right. And of course, nearly 80% by 2035. Even the modern food production that replaces animal agriculture is included. Net emissions from the sector as a whole will decline by 45% by 2030. That fact is right here if you want to look it up. We're not even going to go into GDP. I'm just trying to uncover the major portions. This is a major study. It's going to turn back over 485 million acres. 13 times the size of Io, according to them, will return back to, well, they're saying nature, but let's be honest, that's never what's going to happen. You'll see here the second domestication we talked about. The domestication of microorganisms. Oh, we'll just have those as pets around our home, won't we? Doesn't it sound great how they try to soften this? This is the second domestication of plants and animals. The first domestication allowed us to master macroorganisms. The second will allow us to master microorganisms. The domestication of cattle and plants and mushrooms turns into something that none of us can recognize because we would need lab instruments to do so. But they still need a small portion of the cow who produces those microbes. Oh, thank you. You'll allow some of our cattle to stay alive. And then, however, this small amount of cattle, as they say here, in the fermenter becomes trillions of productive microbes to create cultures, to ultimately create proteins in any form that they seem fit. I don't want my food inside a silver cylinder. I don't know about you. We're not going to go into all the technicals, but here's just some of what they can reproduce. Keratin, collagen, lactase, insulin. That's right. Not only are they going to create food, that's where we're getting here. They're going to go beyond just creating food. They're going to drive disruption in a majority of industries. This is an overall takeover. As here, Pat Brown, CEO of Impossible Food, states, unlike the cow, we get better at making meat every single day in a lab. But we got to go well beyond that. We got to go into, there you see insulin, the first PF breakthrough. They're even going to go into medications, the lab creation of medications beyond what we already have. So now we have meat and we have medications. Well, is that where it's going to end? Oh, no, not at all. They cite back to ancient Egypt. Don't worry. They started this by making beer and drinks. We've just taken the process and perfected it to be able to create meats and fish and chicken. Exactly as God never intended. And here's all the industries and the start of what's the impact's going to be. We're going to, again, type of output, fertilizer, energy, transportation, food, medicine, cosmetics, material, and trade, all will be disrupted by that silver cylinder you see right there. Because now, in our fermentation process, we'll be able to make all of that. So why do we really need that nasty cow lying around anymore? And this shows the curve of how they anticipate the growth to be. And again, molecular composition of milk. The key to understanding the disruption of milk is that the fermentation process, their fermentation process, only needs to disrupt 3.3% of the milk bottle, which is what they say is the effective proteins within the milk bottle, which they can recreate at a more high efficient manner, basically making the milk bottle disappear and changing the cattle industry as a whole because, again, it's a byproduct. If they don't have milk or we don't need ground beef out of the cow, why do we need the cow? Why do we need food as God intended it to be? But don't worry, they're also going to disrupt clothing as a byproduct. Remember, they're taking control of this entire industry, lab control of an industry, disrupting the entire existing market, as you see here. Takes too long for that cow, 2 to 3 years, when we could do it in weeks. Again, God's creation cycle disrupted by modern technology and biology. They don't stop. And here's the relative use of a cow right now. The relative use for ground beef is going to drop by 70% by 2030. Total cow beef is going to drop by 50%. Dairy ingredients by 90% drop by 2030. Milk, as you know it, will be gone. Dairy end products, 85%. Leather and materials, a drop of 90%. Goodbye your leather belts and leather coats. Because this industry, as it shows you here, $170 billion in feed, $110 billion in production, $280 billion In processing, $90 billion in sales. Gone. How many jobs is that going to impact the United States? And don't tell me that these new labs will generate just as many jobs. No, my friends, it will not. It will not. We'll never need tractors. We won't need farming. We won't need milling. We don't need pesticides or fertilizers, which in some ways is a very good thing. Health, the dairy, the beef, all change. The entire matrix changes. The distribution model changes. Why do you think Amazon got in and bought Whole Foods? They're preparing for the implementation and distribution of these ingredients because I guarantee you these will come with a much extended shelf life. We could just alter that in the lab too. We can alter the entire supply chain. We're going to skip over some of this. And here's how your land will change. And it will be distributed by robots. Isn't that nice how they show that? Food technology, wonderful thing, isn't it? Land required for modern food disruption to 100% of animal agriculture. They're going to take back all the land, 95%. 95% of our farmland, they're going to take back. America's heartland is about to be ripped out of this country forever. And they show you the scale of farmland and how much is going to be taken back by this movement. So the key findings, direct U.S. greenhouse gases will drop by 60%. When modern food production that replaces animal agriculture is factored in, net emissions will decline by 45%. When modern food production that replaces animal agriculture is factored in, net water consumption will drop by 35%. Oh, we're just taking back our planet due to this lab-created food supply. Let's not worry about humans or civilization as a whole or eating food as God intended it. No, let's just disrupt the supply so we can save this planet. It's always the agenda. And they even put up their fancy charts on how greenhouse gases are going to be reduced. And then they come up with their strategic plan on policymakers have many tools at their disposal to accelerate or delay the disruption. Don't delay our disruption of the food supply, as well as to capture the benefits and mitigate the potential downsides of the new food system. Don't mitigate any potential. What do you mean there? Potential downsides? Even there, backhandedly admitting to some of them, such as job losses and severe impact these could have on local farming communities. Get everything rural gone. Get everything in the big city. Get everything in labs. Why did I say 2030 was so significant in this argument? All of you who understand Agenda 2030 know exactly what I'm talking about. This is all part of the overall agenda, and they've outlined everything. Accelerate the disruption by updating and streamlining evaluation processes. Change the matrix by which labeling laws are allowed. So if we want to call it meat, we can call it meat. And we don't have to identify it as lab created. That's part of their agenda. They want to change the way your food is labeled. So you don't realize it. They even give examples. You can call it a Milky Way candy bar, but that's not really milk. So see, the law already exists. So what's the difference if I create a trout or a salmon and I call it freshly made? Nobody will know that it was lab created. See, the deception's already beginning. Lying signs and wonders. Consumers are likely to face conflicting information and disinformation about the relative merits and safety of modern food versus traditional animal products. Currently, some regulation seeks to dampen direct demand for new products by restricting what products can be called in the marketplace. And there they go into the examples I gave you and point us nasty alternate media who may speak some words of warning against the overall movement, but rightfully so. Consumers will be driven by factors we discussed in part 2. However, they will also be influenced by media coverage of these new technologies. We would expect businesses involved in the industrial livestock and farming to try to influence consumers through scare stories, pseudoscience, and other tactics to try to cast doubt on the benefits of modern foods. Join us, my friends. Join us in the production of modern foods. Enjoy your food supply in a much safer and cleaner environment, of which prices are driven down and humanity as a whole is saved thanks to our lab-created food supply. This changes our entire food supply. Everything you eat, everything you touch, everything in your fridge, everything in your grocery store. They want to be put into a lab. Anything within a lab can easily be altered or modified quickly and without your knowledge. My friends, this is beyond anything I've ever seen. A movement that I didn't expect to take such a quick foot. And why they're tagging it is to be almost complete in 2030 should concern each and every one of us. I will stay on top of this technology. I will continue to dig deeper. I thank you for your patience. I know this was a long broadcast, but I had to give you the full set of details that I saw to open your eyes to what's happening. And no, I've never eaten one of these, and I don't intend to in any time in this future. This terrifies me, my friends, more than anything almost I'm covering. Even beyond technology, you mess with food, you mess with the human body, you mess with things that should not be touched. God's creations are great enough to take us through, and I'm tired of people saying that they're not. So if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, I certainly hope you will. I'm sorry, there's a great deal of aggravation in my voice for very good reason, because I'm worried America won't wake up to this, and they won't realize what's happening. And the ever-lowering price tag is too much of a tease for them to resist. We have to wake up. It's not all about cost and price. It's about our salvation. So until next time, my name is Justice Knight. I can't thank you enough for being here. Godspeed and God bless. And please, if you haven't subscribed, do share this video. People need to be woken up to what's happening around them before it's much, much too late. God bless you all. I love you all. Thank you for being here.